there's an interesting dynamic that's taking place now in many respects. And it really is the first I'm starting to see of this. And it's like 5 or 6 years, maybe more, since we saw this, where both the corporate media's inclination to promote war at the expense of, well, in addition to, I mean, at the expense of a lot of things, but in addition to, is taking an opportunity to sort of like intimidate Democrats. We're also seeing the same thing in terms of austerity. And I did a pre-record with Senator Russ Feingold yesterday that we're going to play in about a week to talk about what took place in this country in the wake of 9/11. He was the only person to vote against the USA Patriot Act, but he talks about what it was like being in the Senate when a lot of people knew that we shouldn't go to war, and we did, and how cowed Democrats were by things like the specter. And people have to remember, this is 20 years ago. The specter of Vietnam cowed Democrats in a way that I think it might be, well, a little bit hard to appreciate. I mean, it depends on how your perspective. But
it didn't cow them in a way that caused them to reevaluate escalation. I'm saying they voted. The Senate was controlled by Democrats in 2001, and they voted for that war despite the fact that behind closed doors, the majority of them were saying we should not be doing this. And then they walked onto the floor and voted for it. And the interesting thing that Feingold said to me in comparing Obama to Biden was that Obama immediately got rolled, or was, maybe that's even too generous on some level, simply took for granted that the generals and the blob, as it were, the groupthink involved in U.S. foreign policy, took them at face value, assumed that they knew what was best, and was intimidated by them. And Feingold said, to his credit, Joe Biden was not. He got us out of Afghanistan, and he did it. He did it when he said he was going to do it. And there was plenty of opportunity for him to extend a couple of days. But he basically made a decision that we need to get out, and he didn't care about the political hits that he took. Here he is yesterday defending that decision.
I was not going to extend this forever war, and I was not extending a forever exit. The decision to end the military airlift operations at Kabul airport was based on the unanimous recommendation of my civilian and military advisors, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and all the service chiefs, and the commanders in the field.
So credit where credit's due. Joe Biden got us out of there, and he did so despite the fact that you see, obviously, let's put aside the right wing for a moment, because they're both going to say we can't let the dirty Afghans into this country because it's going to change the nature of our country if we allow 100,000 or 200,000 refugees into this country, or 10 for that matter. And simultaneously, how could we leave them to the Taliban? But you have to also look at the supposed center, maybe even the center left, or really the media that is promoting this, despite the fact that, the American public wants to get out, and there's no really legitimate reason for us to stay there. And just case in point, Richard Engel, who is a beloved
NBC war correspondent. Look at this first tweet. Put up the first tweet for me, Bradley. This tweet, this was assembled, I think, by Jeet here on, this is him in February of 2020. U.S. and Taliban agreed for American troops to leave in exchange for Afghanistan to never again be a safe haven for al-Qaeda international terrorists. Why wasn't this deal reached, say, 18 years ago before sacrificing so many lives and so much money? I've asked, can't find a good answer. Now, that is, and keep it up there. I mean, because this is a good question to have asked a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And it's a good question to have asked today, and it's a good question to have asked 5 years ago. And the fact that he can't find a good answer, let's be clear, there's some editorial content in there. And it's an editorial content that I appreciate, because there is no good answer. I mean, he certainly could find somebody who could give an answer, which is, well, we needed to stabilize the situation, blah, blah, blah. But when he says, why wasn't this deal reached 18 years ago, he's also addressing anybody who would say, well, we have achieved so much in Afghanistan that without those 18 years, we wouldn't have been able to achieve it. And so it's only right to do this now. He knows there's no good answer for that. But there's no doubt in my mind, Joe Biden thought that the Afghanistan government would last another 3 weeks, essentially, so that we could pull out and then it would fall. And they just miscalculated how quickly it would fall. You know, you got a house of cards, hard to predict which card it's going to be that drops it. But here is the same Richard Engel. I believe it's the same one, right? Maybe there's not two. And this is him just this week. Put up the next. This is him August 31st. This is him yesterday. Biden saying Afghanistan was yesterday's news, yesterday's terror threat, that he's guided by future threats. How can the Taliban, who still deny bin Laden was responsible for 9/11, controlling a country in the center of Asia, not constitute a current and future threat? I mean, what happened a year and a half ago? Could you not find a good answer for that?
I guess not. Yeah, I mean, and now that the final decision has been reached, we're going to call this a threat. We're going to call this a threat. And meanwhile, the Taliban actually worked with the United States to help get Americans out of the country. There's a quote from an aide who spoke to the Washington Post, I believe. The Taliban were absolutely instrumental, says this congressional aide, who helped in protecting U.S. citizens who were trying to evacuate from getting bombed with suicide bombers there, which goes to show that there are not just good and evil actors in this world, and there are not threats, and there are not, to the extent that the national security apparatus wants to portray it, right? There are people who you cut deals with and people who act in their own interests. And
exactly.
It was in the Taliban's interest for us to leave. It was also in our interest for us to leave. It was the right thing to do. And so we worked with them to get this done. And now, you know.
And I have no doubt that we offered them money, or we have offered them future aid, or whatever it is,
right.
Or we have said we will hold off on, bombing you, or we will bomb the ISIS-K, I guess it's called, which is a rival to the Taliban. And
much smaller.
Yes, but nevertheless, this is you saw their ability to disrupt things there, and there's no doubt that we have made this deal with them, which I'm sure is no more or less odious or than any deal that we have made with Saudi Arabia, who has in many respects a similarly repressive.
Or the deal we made with them before when they were the Mujahideen, perhaps right. That, right? I mean, oh God, it's so morally repugnant that we'd be making a deal with the same people who we gave arms to and made deals before. But that was in order to push forward U.S. military supremacy, because it was an effort to combat the Soviet Union. So yay for that. This, when we are withdrawing from Afghanistan and maybe not expanding our empire to the way that a war reporter who maybe he's a little invested in wars continuing, to his liking, okay, then that's categorically different. I don't know his position on Reagan's policies in Afghanistan during his time, but I'm making an assumption.
Well, and to address, Engel's question, I think do they represent a threat? Well, it's quite clear that we have some leverage with them, and maybe in the form of our Air Force. It may be in the form of our duffel bags of money, but we clearly have some measure of leverage with them. And, I would also say that, look, there's the concept of beat sweeteners that we see with domestic reporters going in and having lines of questions or inquiries that are maybe favorable or appreciated by some of their sources. Is not atypical. And I would imagine if you are someone covering the Pentagon or foreign wars by the United States, that you have some sources who are genuinely invested in
only those sources. That's also the issue, right? There's not a ton of regular Afghan people on the ground who are the sources that dominate these things.
Well, they may be, but they're not consistent.
They're meant to buttress a specific story that is fed to them by those sources, who are also cherry picking their intelligence that they leak to these reporters when they could have a trove of other intelligence that contradicts it in order to feed one narrative. So if you wonder why the media is always on this drumbeat, one, it's because some of them got into this industry because they love the American empire so dearly and don't want to think critically about it. And two, it's because everyone they speak to, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, is saying the same stuff, which is cherry picked for the same agenda.
Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really, thank you.